Hey guys, Webby from SGC here. Today I'm going to run through some basic mission making methodology. The things I will cover today are placing playable units, placing spawn positions, vehicle respawns, objects in the virtual arsenal. So just before we get into it, the first thing to know is whenever you're creating mission, don't load mods that you don't want to actually use in your mission. So things like Blast Core, Gyrosaurus, anything that's generally optional for our server, do not place in the mods when you're loading the mission. So obviously things, if you're using Russian and United States, you want to load this one and this one, but if you're not using those, and we just turn them off. If it's a vanilla mission, don't load anything. So for today guys, I'm just going to be using the virtual reality to make things a bit easier to see. So before you even start placing anything, I highly recommend doing a save so that you can just hit Control S and it'll just save every time. I also recommend doing regular saves, so save, because if armor crashes, you don't lose everything in one go. So all you do is go up to scenario, you can hit save as, whichever. We can see I've already got the template file in there, so we'll just call this number 1 and saved. So all we got to do to save it from now on in is hit Control S and it saves it. Just saves any headaches down the track. Okay, so once we've actually got that in there, we just go to our missions folder. So everyone's is probably going to be a little bit different, but majority of the time it's in the same place. So I'll just bring this over here, and what we can see here is where I've got it stored. So we've got C users, Benny's desk, documents, armor free, missions. Generally speaking, armor mission editor will always look in this folder for your missions. Anything above this level won't show up when you're in the scenario. So when you go save as, you can see there, because that's the root level. When we go back to that folder, we're in the root level now, so you can actually create different folders here to store different types if you want to split into RHS or whatever you want to do. That's perfectly okay, and when you go into open it or whatever else, you'll see here that it'll have different levels. So we can see our mission file here. So when you actually save a mission file, that's all you've got. My template is designed so that you just copy paste in the template, and that gives you all the relevant information for the back-end scripting to save us all a little bit of a headache. So all we do here, because now that we've got that saved, we'll just go back in or grab our template information, and you can essentially just go Control A, copy, and the only thing we don't actually want to copy across is the mission SQM, because obviously that will overwrite what we've got there, unless of course you are using the template strictly to do your mission. But what we'll do is we'll chuck this in here. We won't overwrite the mission SQM. So that means all the back-end stuff's already in there. Okay, so to set our mission name and so forth, so you can do it within the editor, but the description.x overwrites any of that. So what we do, we'll just open that up. And what you can see is the description.s. So whatever you need to do, you can change your author name here. So we'll go Webby. This one here is the part that shows up the top in the load screen. So it could be Bob's mission. And down here is actually the part. I would actually prefer if you could leave this section in here. That'd be much appreciated. And this part here can be edited to Bob's mission. So what we see there is when it comes up in the load screen, which we'll see once they actually load the mission, you'll see that come up. This section here is actually for the image. I'd prefer if you left that alone, but if you want to change it, if you can leave the SGC in it some sort of way, or you can ask me for the SGC logo, whatever. Otherwise, just leave it alone, because getting it wrong will actually stop the mission from loading. So I'm just going to save that, and we'll get rid of that again. Alright, so we've got all the files we need, we've got all the enets, anything that else is related to earplugs, holstering, all those types of things are already in there. We don't have to worry about it. This is a very proven template, so using it in this method will help you a lot. Okay guys, the next part here is to go to attributes, and then we go to general, and what we see here is presentation. So this part is the actual part that's overwritten by the description.ext. So we don't worry about doing any of these parts. So presentation overview locked in the loading screen. All that's overwritten, so there's no point in actually entering anything in there. The other parts that I do here is untick these ones. So we don't want to do saving, we don't want the debriefing or the briefing. It's completely up to you on these two. I just don't use them because majority we actually run through our briefings ourselves. The other part I actually do here is the debug console. So while we don't actually use the function to log in as admin to be a game master anymore, if one of us need to log in to troubleshoot something, then this is the only way we can do it, or we won't be able to access it at all. So the other part here is miscellaneous, independence allegiance. So naturally in Arma these two sides are enemies at all times, but independents might be friends to one of these sides. So if you want them both enemies, you can set it to both enemies, or you can have them both friends to independents, or however you want to do it. 9 times out of 10 I'll always set it to everyone's an enemy, and this allows you to actually have 3 sides fighting each other in any given mission. Unless of course you want independents to actually fight for you, but you know, at the same time you got plenty of blue 4 friendlies that you can place down. Alright, so back to attributes. In here is environment. So you can set your date, you can set your time. So obviously setting it to the black part is going to make it night time, middle of the day, so forth, or you can very specific and set your time here. Generally speaking, when you're ever doing a mission, always set it to the middle of the day because it's really hard to see stuff at night. And you can always flick it over in Achilles at mission start, or set it here at the very end as the last thing you do before you save your mission and you're happy with everything that's been done. You can also set the weather, so time of changes here. So the minimum is 30 minutes. So what that does is on the mission start, these are the parameters that it will follow. So you can see for each one, you can also manually override each one. But the fog is generally something, and the overcast is generally something that always starts on mission start. So when you go mission start, it will start at that. And if you wanted to gradually increase the weather to really foggy, you can bump all these right up, and then I mean you can even set it to 4 hours down the track. It's super foggy, you can't see a damn thing. So that's just the weather, and then that's purely up to you how you want to deal with that. Multiplayer. Okay, so this is pretty important, this part. There's a lot of little bits and pieces in here. Some of it is set in the template, but some of it will be optional to how you want to do your mission. So I always set this as cooperative because that's what we are. And as you know, we run 30 players for any given mission. The summary, it doesn't really matter, but we can always just say Bob's mission here. So we always turn off the AI because the AI will take over any slot that's not taken by a player. And we don't want that unless it's something you do specifically want to use for a mission, but 9 times out of 10 it will be specifically referring to single player missions. The respawn here is very important. So the reason we do respawn on custom position every time is because that allows us to use the respawn screen that you see when you die, and we do these two. So we select respawn position and respawn counter, because everyone actually does their respawn loadouts themselves, and you will be reloaded with whatever you died with. We don't worry about the loadout. There are lots of other features in there that you can use. It's entirely up to you if you want to play with them. Alright, so respawn delay, that's how long it takes for a player to respawn. This must be set to at minimum 5. If you set it to 0, people won't respawn. All they'll get is a blank screen, and that can't be fixed from Zeus or anything. So always make sure that's set to a minimum of 5. Obviously, if you want players to wait a bit longer, you can set that higher. I set the vehicle respawn delay to here. This is just a generic default setting that carries across to the vehicle respawns, but I generally always set them within the respawn modules, which we'll cover shortly. Tasks, we can do these, but I tend not to, because we don't need to for the extensiveness that a actual scripted full-on mission that you might upload to Steam. The revive mode here is enabled for all players because we want everyone to be able to revive. Also remember that each little thing here has a tooltip, so if you don't know quite what something does, just mouse over it, have a good look at what it says. So this is the part where we kind of get stuck sometimes. This is a required trait for a revive. We are running as a medic, and the required item is a medikit. So any other player that only has facts or even a medikit won't be able to revive. If you wanted to change it back the other way, you could do that. Any player has a medikit can revive, or any player that has a first aid kit or a medikit can revive. But we like to run it like that, so only the medics can revive with medikits. Your revive duration, I always set this to 10, completely up to you. Some people want to set it lower. It means you just walk over, and it takes 5-10 seconds, whatever it does, to revive someone. And obviously the only people that we've got here that can revive are the medics, so the multiplier won't matter. If you had it set to none, then if a rifleman just ran over with a medikit, of course, his time would take 10 seconds, but a medic would only take half that time, so it'd take 5 seconds. The force respawn duration is purely, so if you want to force respawn, it takes you 3 seconds to hold in the spacebar and you respawn. We don't deal with incapacitation modes, that's personal preference. I leave it at basic because, again, overcomplicating things can lead to more problems than it's worth, and people wonder why they're dropping like flies. The bleed out duration here, I always set to 5 minutes, and because that gives the player 5 minutes to be revived. Obviously, if you want to be pretty brutal, you can set it to 20 seconds and people will bleed out after 20 seconds, but I always set it to 5. The next part here is the performance. So we always set this up, we always double check the settings. This is set in the template, but it's up to you. This is actually the performance on the server. Well, the server can handle quite a large load. I generally always set this to 30. So this is the minimum distance from a player before the object or vehicle will despawn. We set it to all scenario objects. Obviously, you can do only objects that can respawn or only objects that cannot respawn. So that will just run the cleanup on those objects. I do all scenario objects on both of these for vehicles and character corpses. And 15 and 15 is perfectly fine. That's more than okay. And I generally set this to around 5 minutes. So just keep an eye on these two, because one is hours, and we obviously the max time or something can sit there is an hour. If you want to have a mission where you want lots of objects to be left floating around, that's okay, but just bear that in mind when you're actually making the mission for object density as well. So we'll just set this one to 5. So what we've got there is once the players are away from an object at 30 meters, and there's more than 15 and it's past the 5 minute delay, it will clean up that object. And generally 5 minutes, we're not even in the area anymore, and 30 meters is more than enough. But again, if you want lots of stuff laying around, you can up that, or you can even have that set to 0, and having it set to 0, as it says there, set the value to 0 to remove the minimum distance. So that will clean up regardless of where the players are, but I set it to 30 because I found that to be quite a reasonable distance. We don't have to worry about dynamic simulation too much. The reason is that These distances are perfectly accurate. If you alter this, you'll cause more FPS on loss on players, and that's something we actually want to avoid. Again, not everyone's going to have high-end graphics and high-end machines, so you need to consider them when you're doing your mission as well. But we do always leave it enabled because it saves so many frames for the players. Okay, so now that we've just gotten the basics out of the way, it's very important to do all that stuff first, because forgetting any of those parts will break your mission, and you'll be sitting there wondering why stuff isn't working. So again, save. That's only some pretty minor changes there. While it's not necessary, get in the habit of saving all the time. Alright, so let's move on to playable characters. So what we've got here is we go over to each one of these. So each one of these is objects, compositions, triggers, waypoints, systems, and markers. And each one of these, there is the different sides plus the objects. So here we've got props, so that's obviously all the little objects that float around. But what we want to do is we want to place playable units. So we just select compositions, this one, and a very quick way to do it is just plop down a whole bunch of guys, and obviously we need that number to equal 30. So the way that I do it is I just go, yep, so each of these groups has got 8, so 8, 8, 8, 8, 8 fives are 40, so we need to remove a few of those, and obviously you can see down the left here what units we actually have. So obviously we don't need lots of assistant missile specialists or lots of ammo bearers, because 9 times out of 10 we're actually running our own roles, or as per whatever the dev wants to do. You might run something different. So obviously I need to remove 10 there, so I've got 1 too many, because we want to get it back to 30. So I've taken 8 out, so that leaves us 32, so I can remove him, and that'll give us our 30 units. So what we can do here is you can select the whole lot, and you can just push Control, left click, and sync them all to the one guy. So that makes us all one group, as you can see there. I'm not going to go through and change all the missile specialists and everything. I will do one so that you can see what I've done. You can just double click on the guy, and up the very top here of his attributes, you can just go object type, and you can set him to whatever the hell you want to. So he is now a marksman. Obviously we want to aim to have a few medics in there, and any other classes that you might deem necessary for your mission. So now that we've actually got all our guys synced in one squad, we've got the right number of players, and I can tell you that you do need to have the right number of players, because otherwise it will throw errors in the server. While it won't break it, it's less errors is always a good thing. So what we'll do is we'll just select all these guys. We'll go attributes here. We'll just right click and go attributes. So we've just selected the attributes for every single one of those objects. And when I refer to objects, that's how it deals with things. So basically everything is an object, as you can see here. We've got 30 objects in what I have selected. And what this does is it'll give you a list of things that you can change globally across all those selections. So we want to make every single one of those playable. So what we've done there is, now that we've got all those playable characters, that's actually created our slots in the server. You'll see this guy here, he's got a red. So that's actually the player, and what I actually recommend is always leaving one as player. A player is automatically playable, and when you're placing enemy, if you don't have that, it will more than likely create the playable character on the enemies, which we don't want to do, because it'll create a slot for a player to join the enemy side, which we also don't want to do, unless that's actually something you want to do. But in that case, we could just chuck down a bunch of these guys. We can also make them playable. Like that. So that will create 2 sides. So we've got an OP4 playable slots, and we've got the blue 4 playable slots. And that's only if you wanted to do something like that. I'd prefer us all to work together, but you know, if you want to run a mission where one or two guys are the enemy, then you're okay to do that. Okay, so now that we've actually got our playable units down, we've created slots within the server. The way to actually test anything on the fly, we'll just chuck a save in there. We'll do play in multiplayer. We always play in multiplayer to test. There is no other way to do it. If you do it in single player, it will just be straight out wrong, and with some of the custom scripting behind the back end, it will fire all sorts of errors. So we'll just do play and multiplayer. You can see there, it just automatically generates a virtual server for us. And there you go. You can see all our slots have been created for us. We haven't got any Op4 slots. You can see that it's come up here as Bob's mission. I won't go into the mission because we haven't got a respawn yet. So for the respawn, all we do here is go into systems and modules. Then on the multiplayer section, we've got respawn position. So we'll just chuck that down there. Now we need to edit the attributes on this, so we can double click it or right click and go attributes. And we always name our respawns. So we'll just call this respawn 1. Now we always set it to infantry because we want our guys to spawn on it. And the side is blue 4 because we are the blue 4 side. Obviously, if we were playing as not 4 team or even civilians, we need to set that to the things that we want to respawn on that spot. We do show to everyone because we don't have opposing sides. If we did have opposing sides, you don't need to it to on either side, because as a side, if you can see the other person's respawns, it's not going to be real fair. I always put the notification enabled because that will show when the respawns. Okay, so that's our respawn position set. That's as simple as it gets, or just always remember there, blue 4. Don't ever have it set the leading side because then no one will be able to respawn on it. So if we just give that a whirl, we can see here we got our slots. We'll go okay. You can see there we've got Bob's mission. And that's when we get our respawn one down here. And we can respawn on that spot. And here we are. And we disabled the AI, so we haven't got any AI being generated in those playable slots. Okay, so vehicle respawns. So what I'll do here is chuck down, so this one down here, place vehicles with crew, I'm going to turn that off. And I'm going to chuck down some helmet. Let's go helmet boxes. So what we do here is we go back into systems, modules, vehicle respawn. We chuck that there. Now, same as always, we can select all of those. And what we do is go right click, connect, sync to, and then that gives us a little thing where we can sync it to. So we're going to sync that to the vehicle respawn. So that what that tells the script is that we want to respawn each one of these vehicles as per whatever attributes we put in here. So the attributes for this is you can make the delay whatever you want. If you want to make sure a vehicle isn't used overly, you can set it higher, but I generally always set it to 30 to 60 seconds. And I set the deserted distance to 500. The reason for this is that if everyone dies, the vehicles won't respawn automatically. They'll be sitting in the field for a very long time. You can also set tickets for these. So what happens is if this vehicle gets destroyed, that minuses a ticket from that vehicle, and once the tickets run out, that won't respawn anymore. We won't worry about expression. The position, we always set as starting position, unless there's something specific here you want to do. I'll leave that up to you to do it, but this is just for the basics. The wreck, Armour has a little bit of an issue with delete with an explosion effect, because if you leave it like that, when the explosion goes off, and it generally goes off right when it respawns, it will also delete the next vehicle that respawns. So I just set it to delete. So yep, we set the notification that it has respawned. We can do force respawn, or vehicles when they're blown up, and the respawn when disabled, enable. So when the vehicle gets to a state where it's no longer movable, or it tells you right here, controls whether vehicles should respawn after becoming immobilized. So I generally do that because a vehicle sitting in the field that's half damaged isn't going to do anyone any good, even if people are outside the deserted distance. So, well, I mean, it will respawn after the deserted distance anyway. And that's a vehicle respawn, essentially. So if we go in here, we'll go into an AT guy. Let me see, I am at here. I'll just fire a missile this one. Okay, so okay, there we go. Technically speaking, that vehicle was damaged enough that it won't be usable anymore, so it would have respawned anyway. So after 30 seconds, which should be coming up pretty quickly. There we go. You can see a vehicle has respawned. And that's been applied because all those vehicles are synced to that vehicle respawn. All of those will have the same functionality. Okay, so just touching on the respawn again. Any object can be copy and pasted in the editor. So even for a vehicle respawn, if you wanted to reuse the same thing, we can just copy and paste them and it'll have exactly the same attributes. This will also go for your respawn positions. So we copy that one, paste that one, and that'll give us two separate respawn positions that are available to the players to respawn on. But what we're going to move on to now is a virtual arsenal. So you can pretty much put an arsenal on majority objects. It's completely up to you, so I'm just going to chuck down an AAF box here. And all we do is we just pass a line of code in the ENIT here. So what you'll see when you actually open the attributes normally is just like a screen here. And all we do in here is drop this line of code. This line of code is available with a few others in our SGC ARM3 development cheat sheet, which you can see here. It tells you what the different functions do, and these are for disabling AI commands and different things that will allow units to either do something or not do something. That's available in the how-to. But for the arsenal, this is the section we've got here. That's all we want, so that will enable a virtual arsenal on that object. If you wanted to do an arsenal that was limited to just the gear that the players have, we just go into it, we get our equipment storage and hit that one. So when you go, I'll do both right now. So you'll see the difference here. So we've got arsenal, which is obviously your virtual arsenal, which enables you to carry basically anything that's available in the game. And if we go to this arsenal, it'll only give you the weapons that the players are currently carrying or are enabled to carry for that class. There's been a few questions over that one, so that's going to be something that's going to be useful to you guys. Just remember, it's always that second tab. That tab is an actual activation for that attribute. It's not just there like that. Obviously, default will only carry what you can see there. So what we can see there is it's got one of all those things. But if you set it to virtual, it'll be infinite across any of those things. This is also how you set your equipment within the crates. And it's entirely up to you. It can take a very long time. So setting it to this virtual way can restrict the loadouts to the players, while not being too restrictive at the same time, but there's only so much in the box. Okay, so I'm just going to place some units down here and just run over that real quick. The difference between editing an individual unit and using a group is a global variable amongst that particular squad. So if we click on this one, you can see that's going to pass different things like the skill. There's different states that you can set for them, whether they take damage, the simulation, which has come up a few times in conversation. Simulation, well, it tells you right there. When disabled, the object will freeze and ignore any input or collision. So if it's run into, nothing will happen to it. It's basically when you have two things colliding with one another, nothing will happen if you have that disabled. I mean, you can set things like identities. Probability of presence is actually a good one. If you wanted to chuck down a whole bunch of units on an area and you just wanted to, they may or may not appear, you can set it to 50%. But obviously, if you're actually designing a mission in a specific way, you always want them to show up at 100%. And then we got data linking. So data linking is where the enemies share information. They do share information regardless. However, this will pretty much ensure that every enemy that you have this turned on will be able to see and hear where you are if one of the enemies spots you. Okay, so just touching on objects. Individual objects can be added here through the objects and props. So that's anything from walls to houses to bases. If you want to do military stuff, there's stuff like HQs. Obviously, you can see here these are ruined ones. In vanilla stuff, will always give you a thumbnail. In some mods, it will, and other mods, it won't. But we'll just chuck this down here, and what that's just given us enemy base. Obviously, if you do not want an object to be destroyed, we just turn off enable damage, and that will make that building pretty much indestructible. So if CAS comes in, it won't get destroyed. The other thing to note with buildings is not all buildings have a ruined state. So when something gets destroyed, it actually reverts to its ruined state. Some objects just don't have it. Majority of houses and anything like that will always have it, but I'm sure you all know that some objects just can't be destroyed. A prime example are the modular bunkers, which isn't going to show up for me. So we've got a modular bunker. Doesn't matter how many times you hit that thing, it's not going to be destroyed. It does have a destroyed state, but it looks exactly the same. And as you can see there is no ruined type for that. So obviously destroying it isn't going to destroy it as such. Just another thing before we finish up, PBO manager is pretty important part of Arma. I've mentioned before that that's how Arma unpacks itself into a server. While they will run directly out of a mission folder, it doesn't work nearly as well as a PBO, so I highly recommend it. You can see there, this one's on Armaholic. It's been there for years and years and years. It's also available through the Discord. There's a link there in useful or how-to files. Just download that, and what you actually see when you do that is when you have a context menu, you right click on it, you've got PBO manager that shows up, and you can pack that into a PBO. So that will actually pack that file into a PBO, as you can see there. And when you double click a PBO, it'll give you a little file manager for the PBO. You can edit these files directly in the PBO, but they must be saved, and it essentially unpacks and repacks that file on the fly. And it's absolutely the reverse. So if you have a PBO that you've got, or such as the templates, you just right click on it, You go to PBO Manager, extract to, and probably just keep it the same name, just for simplicity. And that's just unpack that to there, and we've got the same there. Just one more thing I want to touch on is using different maps from mods in particular. The exact method that I've just shown you there can be implemented the same way. Obviously, when you're in the launcher, you want to actually load the mod and then use your assets, but always bear in mind that mod needs to be loaded with the server. Otherwise, lots of people will get lots of invisible stuff, and that's probably not ideal. So when you do custom maps, the extensions for those folders, which I'll just have a quick look at. So this here is the extension. So this tells Arma what the map is. You'll get things like Tanoa, which is obviously Tanoa. But you can see some others here, like Bozkata. What you can see here is the Bozkata map. So it's actually got the extension Bozkata. So this will apply to any different map that's not used, but just remember it must be loaded with the server. And that's it, guys. I hope this helps some of you out. If there's any more questions, feel free to ask.